supposed to sum up a person. It's hard to sum up a person. It's hard to sum up my mother. One thing that I can say to you for sure in describing her essence is modesty. She would be, I was just thinking that she was going to rise up there and protest all of the hubbub and my extremely moving words in praise of her. She would feel very uncomfortable with that. That's the kind of person she was. For women of that age, from that period, it was not unusual to characterize them in terms of their relationships to others. Women did not really have their own lives, their own careers. They were wives, they were mothers, they were sisters. In this case, my mother was some mother. She also became a grandmother of 6 children who are now, most of whom are here, the light of her life in her latter period. She became a grand aunt to many nephews and nieces. And importantly, she was a servant of God. As my sister so eloquently put it, there's no way to describe my mother without describing her relationship to Jesus Christ. And as my sister also alluded, she had potential. If she were born today, or if she were one of my daughters or one of the young ladies here, she would have had her own career. She was an accomplished musician, vocalist. Her voice was beautiful. She was an accomplished painter, artist. But that was not her time. The thing that I want to describe, though, it's a little different from somebody, a woman who simply is a mother or a grandmother or a daughter or a sister or husband, is that my mother had an inner life. Only she and God existed, for she was a servant of God. I saw that first when we were growing up. She would go on walks by herself. She'd forage for certain kinds of vegetation that Americans would consider weed, but Koreans, especially of her generation, who foraged for food in the wake of the Korean devastation. And she would bring it home and she would make spinach soup out of it. I also remember her when I was very young in Korea. She would be just kind of disappear when we were out on a creek. She'd be looking for crayfish. And she was always finding a place for herself to be quiet. She somehow found this chestnut tree in Penn State campus. And she took us there to forage for the chestnuts in full. And when she was at Beaver Church, where Ruth nicely took us, and my father at that time was a profound atheist. When my mother sung the hymnals, she was with God in her internal space, completely invulnerable and invincible. The serenity that my sister described, that was its source, her inner life with God. This is something that she grew up with because of her great father and her great mother. When Mai and I grew up in that household in Korea, we called her the tiger. She was ferociously mean and loving. She had survived the Korean War. she passed too. And I'm being emotional because she was part of our lives, my mother's life. And she was a source of my mother, and whatever my mother became was because of these incredible figures in her life. Then her older sister, my cousin Dare is here. She was a rock. Her younger sister, who's still in Korea, supported her constantly. She was a sister and a daughter and a mother and a grandmother. But at all times, she was one soup to me with her private musings and devotional to Jesus Christ. It was simply unshakable. Her life turned very different. I think of her life in the United States as a pre and post. The pre is when my dad, came to the United States to find that her husband would travel here ostensibly to get a degree and be ordained. Became an atheist. Turned to Western philosophy in his pursuit of truth and thought that's where it would be found. So hard drinking, hard smoking, cussing, enormously charismatic person. But my mother was isolated. This gentle woman who had come, who was Christian to heart in the best sense of that word, the absolute best. She was isolated for years with only her children and her devotion to her children and those Sunday sermons in Beaver Church to sustain her. And then there was an after, when my father had what I call a St. Augustinian experience and visited by an old friend who asked him to pray with him. And they turned a page in the Bible, and my father was transformed. He became the most powerful and eloquent minister I've ever known. In that post-life, my mother found really an answer to her prayers. And life became transformed for her. She would take my father to task about his sermons. She would say, it's too complicated. Quit talking about Kierkegaard. People don't understand what you're saying. Because her Christianity was something to behold. It was as real and solid to her, God's love for us and his personal commitment to each of us. It was so real, it was more real than this desk in front of me. It was just faith. She didn't have to talk about Kierkegaard or think about the Platonists and St. Augustine and his travels, all of that, the stuff that my father needed to reach the same conclusions my mother knew to the core of her being. She became his biggest critic, his biggest supporter. She was always the CFO of the house. I mean, this guy could not make money to save his life. I mean, he was a college professor, scraping by, but he was always looking to buy a Rolex watch. And my mother, who was frugal beyond compare, just somehow managed to keep that household going. Sent 3 kids to college. Always had cash somehow to give out. I don't know where she found it. I thought she was a money launderer. It's hard to sum up a person. You get a glimpse of who this person is. That's all we can do. But at the end of the day, I can't help but be selfish and say, her being was to be our mother. I'm being selfish in saying that. I know that she was much more than that. But for me and for Mai and Johnny, that's who she was. And there was no mother like her. I'm sure every child says that. That's the importance of motherhood. But she lived it. She threw herself at it. That's what she had in her life, was us and God. I thank God for lending us beautiful ones who can to be this loving force in our lives. And now it's her time. Reunited with God in heaven. All of her essence and goodness and love are with Him.